Welcome back to the 2023 verdict. It's our continuing coverage of the elections. We're keeping an eye on the National Coalition Center. So as soon as they are set for everybody, we will go right there. But in the meantime, we've got two gentlemen who join us here in the studios today. Dr. Chris Kwaja is of Watching the Vote. And then Sheikh Nuruddin Lemo, Yaga Africa Working Group. So both of them are here with us to just take us through some of the observations previously, perhaps with what's going on, and it could also be probably what to expect as a result of what we're seeing in Africa. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Nigerians.
Dr. Kwaja, let me start with you. Watching the vote, I guess these parties have been watching this vote and they're not happy with what they've seen so far. What say you on this?
Thank you very much. There are three sides to watching the vote. We have the political parties that have invested so much and all are struggling to ensure that victory is something that each of them appropriates. The second layer, civil society, the media, that are also working to ensure that the election is something that is conducted in a way that the outcome speaks to the reality of the people's mandate that they conferred on the candidates. And the third layer are the citizens themselves who are out there. They engage the candidates. On the day of voting, they were out in the sun or in the rain, and they voted for individuals or political parties of their choices. And today, they are all glued to their TV sets, social media, all trying to monitor how the results are coming out, the way they are coming out. And the expectation is that INEC should conduct an election that is credible, that is peaceful, that is free, that is fair, and an election that will signal an improvement from previous elections that we witnessed since 1999.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question when you say the political parties have invested so much. But let me take you to Mr. Lemo. Who's more invested, the political parties or the citizens?
Yes. So it's both, in that the political parties represent the citizens. And for many of the voters, they feel very aggrieved that their parties are not winning as expected. Or have lost more than they expected. So there's a lot of emotional investment. There's a lot of financial investment, even by the federal government. But I think the expectation that it's going to be perfect would be naive. Nowhere is it perfect. The level of imperfection and how we manage political victory and loss, I think, is one where we need to just understand, however bad it is, it doesn't justify taking the law into your own hands. It doesn't justify killing or being killed.
I'm just wondering, when you say expecting it to be perfect, is it that they actually expect it to be perfect, or they just expected the transparent process? Because I imagine that many of them know that only one person can win, not 18 of them. So is it about that, or they look to the process, and if they don't see the process, they get aggrieved?
And I think that's the reality you're referring to. We don't have a perfect process, and everybody will see different levels of imperfection because nobody will say it's perfect. But when I believed from the very beginning that this candidate would win, but you also really believe that your candidate would win, and things are not happening in a way that is transparent enough to make me see where I was wrong in my beliefs, unfortunately, how I handle those expectations can be productive or unproductive to peace, to learning from the current elections and how we move forward.
Well, Dr. Kwaja, when you speak about watching the vote, I know that in different times when we had, before the elections, several of them came through, and all the politicians that we came across, all of them, not us, without exception to anyone, they all kept on saying, I am sure we will win. We will surprise you. They all say that, but we know that deep within them, they're just trying to psych themselves and not just put up a front and a face. So when watching the vote, how do you, I'm just trying to look at the mindset for you, because I imagine it will be a lot different from perhaps the players and the electorate themselves, because If they were watching, bearing at the back of their minds that, of course, we know that we're not going to win, I think the reaction might have been a little different in terms of the expectations, whichever way the pendulum swings. Does that make sense?
I think one of the biggest challenge we face with our elections in Nigeria is also this point about the relativism of perfectionism we're talking about, where perfectionism is defined on the basis of the success that a political party gets. And when you win, you hail the process, you believe that the process was perfect.
That's for who? For politicians?
Good, for politicians. Now, every politician you see have a supporter back to the citizens. So when you see politicians either hitting up the polity because we did not win, or celebrating the process because they won, behind them are Nigerians that are either supporting for those who won or not supporting for those who lose or believe that they are losing. And on that point, you have this mixed reaction to whether or not the process is perfect. But within the context of watching the vote, what we've been doing in Yaga is to say, are there benchmarks for perfectionism? Yes, there are benchmarks. The level of transparency in terms of how the security agencies operate with professionalism, the level of transparency in terms of the level of communication and engagement between INEC and the citizens, and how every process of the election is defined on the basis of the clarity and the meticulousness that comes with the preparation for that election. And where citizens begin to have doubt over that process, you will begin to see concerns and reactions that are negative. And one of the biggest concerns we've seen over time that led to the decision by INEC to say, okay, we need to digitalize, we need to invest in ICT in order to improve the quality and integrity of elections.
Yeah.
And we saw with the election in Ekiti, in Oshun, for instance, where some level of improvements were recorded, and Nigerians came with this, just invested in these elections with some level of confidence that, okay, if Oshun was able to give us this level of confidence, then the 2023 presidential and National Assembly elections, as well as the governorship and House of Assembly elections, will also witness some level of improvements that Nigerians will say, yes, we have gotten to some level where the integrity of our elections should be and can be celebrated.
I don't know how all of those rank in your scale of preference in terms of which one should they do a lot better in that can cover up for the others. I don't know, but I'm just wondering, is it early days for us to ask, in the scheme of things, as they are all playing out now, concerning how the elections are turning out, because it's still, the collation and results are still being announced and that process is still going on. Is it early days to ask how it ranks within your own framework with all of those parameters you highlighted?
Yeah, I think for now it's a bit too early, but there are preliminary findings that we can see, so to speak, because we have other elections coming up. And what can we do to improve on the gubernatorial and the state House of Assembly elections that are coming up? And first is this whole issue of the beavers. The crisis we're dealing with today is rooted in the malfunctioning of the beavers. And when I say malfunctioning, I'm talking about the inability of INEC to live up to expectation in terms of the promise it made to Nigerians, and that Nigerians had this very strong optimism that the beavers will be used all through the process of the elections, and the lateness with which they saw the results coming up raised some of these questions.
You mean not posting it, not viewing it real time?
Yeah, on the IREF. Yeah, so it's one. And if we are to learn lessons from these and move forward to say, okay, what will the outlook be for the governorship and the House of Assembly elections? This is one key area of conversation that we need to have with INEC or INEC need to engage Nigerians on, because that level of clarity and transparency is very important. Because today, citizens are accusing INEC, not because INEC does not mean well for Nigerians, because when you see the chairman of INEC, when you see other national commissioners of INEC and the resident electoral commissioners speak, or from the engagement we had with them, you can see some level of efforts being put in to ensure that they deliver on elections that are credible. But these challenges were challenges that Nigerians did not receive adequate communication on, in terms of those concerns that they raised in from yesterday down to this moment that we're having this conversation.
Okay. Mr. Lemo, if you could just weigh in a bit. We understand, you've seen that there have been reactions from different political parties, some for, some against, and even INEC has also reacted to the reactions from these different people. We've not really heard the reactions of the citizens. I mean, they reacted with their votes, and they're just patiently waiting. And we understand that our correspondent is where right now the vice presidential candidates of two political parties are about to brief the press and talk about this whole thing. But what do you think, this whole reactions, the circle that's going on now, what would be the outcome of all these reactions? Do you think INEC might budge? Or?
Difficult to say, but one thing I think is we all learn. We all learn. In the airline industry, just to move sideways, when there's a plane crash, everybody gets focused on looking for the black box. Nobody is quick to judge. Let's get the black box, and let's get the information, not really for the sake of who to punish, but how to make sure the next plane doesn't crash for the same reason.
So what's the black box here?
I think the whole thing is a black box, and we are learning from this black box, from the pre-election and some of the delays and probably some level of overconfidence and just assumption that the IT will not disappoint. Scenarios they most likely looked into, but probably some that they didn't expect. It's all learning. To election day and what happened at the polls. How ready were they? And then the counting and how transparent. And there was corruption, there was violence. How did these start? It's this diagnosis that allows us to look at every election season as an opportunity to learn lessons so that moving forward, elections will come and go. It's not the end of life. It's not a day of judgment in that sense. It is just an event. It's important. But how do we make sure that our young democracy grows like the airline industry, such that every plane crash guarantees the next flight is a safer one, because the lessons were learned?
Let's see this. So if you look at the screen now, you see footage of the vice presidential candidates of the People's Democratic Party and the Labour Party going in for a press conference. They are going to address the press, I guess, about the same thing everybody else is thinking about. And our correspondents are there, and hopefully we'll get to hear what they're saying real quick. They've not started yet. Again, that's footage from that point. But having heard some of them and what they're saying,
I understand that they've started.
Okay,
actually.
so let's just get that here.
But we'll cross over much later, I believe, to get back to you on that one. But you know, if I could just piggyback on that black box principle, which you just highlighted moments ago, you know, for that scenario, I think that in that regard, when that happens and everybody goes to the black box, isn't that because it is already established? Everybody knows what to do in that scenario. It's been choreographed, they've done it before, they've gone through the process, they see that that is always a process. As they promised, that's how it happens. But in this case, when it happens, and we talk about how do we make sure it doesn't happen again, shouldn't we, because many of the people who are aggrieved right now say they haven't gotten the kind of communication or seen that kind of leadership on the part of those who are supposed to do it, so that they know that we are all pulling in the same direction, which will then give everybody the reason to say, listen, they've given us that direction, we can all now wait and go for the black box. But at this point, they say there's a lot of confusion. They can't even agree on what the process established by the law. So that seems to be a slightly different from that black box scenario.
No, and I think that is a lesson we are learning. Had this debate happened a year earlier, what exactly does this clause mean? we probably would not be having it with emotions. We probably would, it'll still be emotional, but not with things at stake as they are now. This will come and go. Yeah. How it'll be settled, our hope is that a bad situation is not made worse, that as terrible as it may be, it doesn't become something worse than we are dealing with. And I think this is part of the big job of media personnel, to let the nation and educate the nation. You're the continuing education for everybody. People are glued on, and if anybody is going to learn political science and they are not in class, it's because you guys are helping pick out the lessons from the black box, but making sure that even after the elections, you actually, when things have calmed down a bit, let us actually have a more sane, less emotive, emotional discussion on this. So I think it is all part of the learning. It is difficult to learn when you are stressed, when you are angry, when you are frustrated, when you can't understand why somebody behaved in a particular way, and why after 4 years, it's not exactly all the same people. We experiment. The best democracies still start looking at, okay, how have disabled people been helped in this one? How can we be more transparent? How can we handle voter disappointment with anything, whether real or perceived?
But at the moment, sorry, pardon me, I'm just wondering, now, all of what you said, many would have said, okay, if we had concluded the process, yes, we can sit back and look through and say, okay, look, how do we correct all of this? But when it's in the middle, we're still looking at it, and they expect certain persons to take certain decisions, and it's not happening for them. How do you then manage that? Because right now, look at all of them. They're having press conferences, and their supporters are all just waiting. Nobody knows what one might say here, and then they react in certain ways. So isn't that going to be, managing that situation will be different from when it's over and done with, don't you think?
I think, you know, there's a very clear difference between a leader and a follower. And how people handle their followers in time of crisis tells you the kind of leader they are. There's a kind of leader who behaves like a flag. The flag doesn't determine the direction of the wind. And you have those leaders who want to look at, what are my people wanting me to do, whether right or wrong, and they go in line with that. But there's a kind of leader who sees the people are getting worked up. This is going to turn out bad. True leadership is to redirect. The leader should not be a follower. The leader should be one who redirects his followers to what is most productive. We have to remember at the end of the day, what's most important in the whole of this election is our Nigeria. Is peace and justice must reign. We keep repeating that like a prayer and a mantra every day in one school or the other. This is the time when we need to see that in the actions of the various leaders. And I think, to me, it shows us the kind of people who we actually have.
So for the political parties right now, if you ask them, I'm sure the chances are very high that they'll be talking about justice. And they will talk about how maybe there will be no peace without justice. As Chamberlain did highlight that, you know, all of this learning, you know, which you've been talking about, there seems to be, you know, something that we have to do even while the process is going on. And it looks like, you know, we're keeping an eye on the National Collation Center. But in the meantime, there is so much that is happening which has the potential to take away from the National Collation Center and what is happening at the National Collation Center. Yeah. Do you fear, because some of the reactions that we've seen a press conference by the Labour Party, the PDP, and ADC. We're watching, also monitoring another joint press conference about to be given by the vice presidential candidate of both the Labour Party and the PDP. What import do you think this could have for what is actually happening at the National Collation Center?
I think where we are now, the integrity and credibility of INEC is on trial. And it's on trial in the eyes of the international community, Nigerians, and the political parties themselves. Because when you engage the political parties and their candidates, they believe they've invested so much, even more than their followers. Because for them, time, resources, many of them got into loans and mortgaged many things just to get to that level. And I think at this very critical point, we need strong voices that are able to bring people together, both from the religious, the political, and other key levels. We also need INEC to do more in terms of engaging the political parties. We saw that at the National Coalition Center, the kind of conversation going on between the returning officers of the political parties and the leadership of INEC. And for some of them, they are saying, hey, we are a bit worried about the process, and we need you to really look at where we are with the view of also taking certain steps. And I think for me, at this very critical stage, INEC should engage these political parties, because there will always be a common ground. The black box hypothesis he talked about. What is the issue? People are not worried over coming out to vote. They are not worried over the counting of votes, but the concern is about the transmission of this vote. So at least we have a sense of
where... Is that a condition precedent before we go for the black box?
Yeah. So all these are areas that people have also looked at to say, okay, we voted because between 8 a.m. to 12 noon, everywhere was calm. For all the political parties and their candidates who voted, they were confident that we trust the process at that point. It was when the transmission became a problem that we began to see the kind of reactions that we are having. And I think for me, as the vice presidential candidates read their speech or engage the media, yet we don't know what they will say.
Yeah.
But I think what they say will be very important, either in helping us move forward or drawing the country back. And by drawing the country back, it means derailing whatever investment as a country we've made on our democracy. And I think for me, this is where we are right now.
You spoke of strong voices coming up to speak. And for a number of people, there were questions as to whether we still have enough voices considered neutral enough to be able to, carry the weight that they will need to carry. Because yesterday we saw former President Olusegun Obasanjo addressing the press and, talking about how he's constrained to speak, asking that, the president intervene in the matter. But, partisan voices have said, look, former president, you're not neutral in this matter. You have a candidate. So I'm just wondering, do you think that we have sufficient voices left to be able to say they are coming up to speak, who will be considered neutral in this particular,
I think for peace, we don't need neutral voices. Neutral voices would be ideal, but what we want is even a biased voice to calm his own people down. And so even if you're not neutral and you've got your people around you, so long as you can agree that making things worse is not better for any of us, that's really what we need. And it is usually when it gets dark that the stars start to shine more brighter. It is when it gets dark that we appreciate light. It is when we are in this kind of difficult situation, at the cusp probably of violence. We pray it never gets to that. But we've already seen it in some places. In other words, things are getting warmer and hotter. This is when we need every level of leadership, from religious, from teachers, from parents, from the matriarch or patriarch of a family, the traditional leader, and within the political system also, just as we would want the various candidates and their deputies, assistants, the next in line, the whole chain has to sing a similar, even if not an identical song, but the understanding that we shouldn't fight over this. It is not in our best interest, and it doesn't show leadership if you just succumb to emotions that make things worse. It says a lot more about you, actually, than the situation.
It is a very dicey situation that we found ourselves. And to think that we still have elections coming up in another 2 weeks or so, the questions as to how that is going to be conducted and what will happen, ahead of that. Because a number of people already thought that, okay, with what has happened at the presidential level, perhaps there will be a fair chance in terms of predicting the fair trade winds of what will happen in the governorship elections. But with all that we are seeing, there are now big questions as to whether politicians who are currently aggrieved in this process will allow that, elections hold on the 11th of March. What are your thoughts on this?
My hypothesis is that for many politicians that are aggrieved with what has just happened, they will take advantage of the situation and make the forthcoming gubernatorial and House of Assembly elections more difficult. And that means we need to watch out for some level of violence that we'll see within and across political parties, because one of the biggest lessons we've learned from this election is that the issue of anti-party activity is something that you can't really tell. We've seen how people voted against candidates of their parties or against candidates of the other parties. And some are waiting to take their pound of flesh with the governorship election that is coming. More so that we have these unresolved issues that will now make the situation messier. And that is why it is important for us to really deal with the issues we have now, so that when we get to the elections that are coming up very soon, we will not be carrying these baggages of hate, baggages of mistrust or distrust, or baggages of uncertainty around whether the election itself will be credible or not credible.
Do we have anything on the order? I do know that before now, the order of elections has also been something that has been a bone of contention. People have said, oh, why should we always do the presidential elections first? It always has a sweeping effect on what happens on the governorship elections. Sometimes it makes the governorship elections even more hard-fought than it ought to, because at that point it looks like that's the only thing that politicians at the local level can now then hold on to. But I am just wondering, do you have anything on, maybe we learn any lessons in terms of reversing the process? Do you think that if the governorship, for instance, were settled, would it have a calming effect of some sort on the presidential elections, which are always so hard fought?
I think the order of elections speaks more to the politics of it than even the legal of it, because there is no rule that says this must come before that. It is within the prerogative of INEC to decide which one comes first. But for many political parties and their candidates and even watchers of Nigerian politics, they believe that sometimes this order is negotiated, or people put pressure on INEC, not just now, from 1999, to say we want this election to take place. Because when you have the presidential election taking place before the gubernatorial, the bandwagon effect it will have on the polity help even candidates that ordinarily might not win an election to win. We saw that with the Buhari effect from 2015, 2019. Now that Buhari is not contesting in 2023, we've seen the outcome of this election and how, to the tent all Nigerians, people decided, okay, we don't have any stake with the president. Now we can vote for whoever we want to vote for. Certainly, there will be a bandwagon effect for this election. And I think part of what we are seeing, the heightening tension that we are seeing in the polity today, is that whoever emerges as president-elect, his election will bring a bandwagon effect on the gubernatorial and the House of Assembly elections.
Mr. Lemon, for one who interacts with the people practically on a weekly or daily basis, as the case may be, what do you think the expectations of the citizenry is as regards this order of elections? I mean, the governor is closer to the people than the president. And in terms of our desire for democracy, which do you think would have worked out better for the people?
Difficult to say. And I think it's anything that creates a bandwagon effect is probably not what's best. The more independent decisions are made, the better. That the choice of a people is because of what they think is best for them, as opposed to what's happening elsewhere that's not directly influencing that. However, having said that, I don't want to speak as if I'm a political scientist. There must be some science. There must be some lessons learned from other nations, those who have been with democracy much longer, to determine what's the best order to ensure, because whichever one you do, there's always going to be an advantage or disadvantage. Unfortunately, that's not my area of competence, but I think having raised it and the point he made about the bandwagon effect and this cascade of how success on one influences the other, I think that is not positive. There may be other positives, but that will be outside my expertise.